A sporting disappointment at home, but a successful global spectacle. The Football World Cup comes to an end in Brazil. But as the crowds drift away, the big question remains, was it all worth it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Bah Thibault. It was an event that was as much embraced as it was resented. A showcase for what Brazilian footballing legend Pelé first described as the beautiful game, or an extravagance that brought 1 million marchers onto the streets in protest at the multi-billion-dollar price tag. Brazil faced widespread criticism over corruption, misplaced priorities and overspending in the run-up to the World Cup. But President Dilma Rousseff believes the nation has risen to the challenge.
Eu acredito que o Brasil se superou ao organizar essa Copa.
I believe Brazil has excelled in organizing this World Cup and should be congratulated for it. I will explain to you why. Firstly, everyone had big expectations. Many were saying that Brazil would not be capable of hosting the World Cup. So we not only excelled in concrete issues like guaranteeing that the stadiums were complete, airports fully operational, as well as firm security for the protection of different football teams and visiting heads of state, but we also overcame a negative campaign against the World Cup in Brazil.
What Brazil didn't succeed in doing was winning the World Cup. Worse than that, they were beaten 7-1 in the semi-final by the eventual winners, Germany, drawing newspaper headlines that spoke of shame and humiliation. And there were more anti-World Cup protests in Rio de Janeiro just before the final match of the tournament between Germany and Argentina. Teachers, healthcare workers, students and community activists echoed complaints from earlier demonstrations criticizing the amount spent on hosting the World Cup. But there were celebrations too at the end of the month-long tournament, which attracted thousands of fans from all over the world. Germany securing a 4th World Cup victory in front of an estimated television audience of more than 1 billion people. All right, let's get the thoughts of our guests. In Rio de Janeiro, Mauricio Savarese, a football journalist and author of A to Zico, an alphabet of Brazilian football. Joining us from Manchester is sports psychologist Roberto Forzoni. And also in Rio, we have Marcio Januario, a social entrepreneur and founder of a theatre project for children in the city's favelas. Thank you all, gentlemen, for being on Inside Story today. Mauricio, if I can start with you, how would you rate this World Cup? Was it a good experience for you? Are you proud at how your country organized this event?
Well, I think it was a very nicely organized tournament. Of course, the preparations were bumpy, and in the end, people had many doubts were actually justifiable before the World Cup. But it turned out to be a nice event. Foreigners had a nice experience. Brazilians had a nice experience. And the doomsday most people expected before the tournament didn't quite show up in Brazil. And that shows two things in my impression. The number one is that Brazil is a normal country. It's not like this bizarre place in which people go and have terrible experiences. And the other one is that people will have to reconsider their expectations for the Olympics. Not only people who are coming, but also the Brazilian government, because they promised so much and they delivered so less that they have to adjust the expectations for the next 2 years.
Marcio Januario in Rio, as Mauricio said there were people who doubted that Brazil could organize a successful World Cup, but the doomsday predictions of, unfinished stadia, violent, widespread protests didn't exactly happen. So do you think that this World Cup will leave a positive legacy on your country?
I think that's a great organization and it's good for us. The people are happy here, but we have to show other image of Brazil. We have to show other things and not only organization from parties. We have to do other things here. We have to do more investment in education and other things. And soccer is only a game. It's not only an image I want to show for our country, to other countries.
Okay. Roberto, let me get your view. What do you think this World Cup has done for the psyche of Brazilians? I remember when France won at home in 1988, their triumph was hailed as a unifying force for a country where racial tensions were very high and so on. What do you think this tournament did for Brazil?
Well, for any host country, success is phenomenal. Success creates higher morale, better communication. It creates more productivity amongst the people of that country. So not succeeding, particularly in Brazil, is going to have a negative impact. Where there was unrest already, don't forget 1 million people took to the streets 1 year ago protesting at the lack of investment in public sector. So those people are not going to be happy now that 11 billion plus has been spent on the World Cup and the country wasn't successful.
Do you think, Marcio, that it was all worth it, the money that was spent? And do you think that this competition also showed the extent of the social and economic divide that exists in Brazil today?
Yes, we have a great problem with education here. And I see every time little guys, young black guys are dying all the days. We have 1 gay is dying, 2 in Brazil. Each day we have a lot of situations that are too complicated to work here with culture. And we have now the situation to growing up. We have to do more investment in culture, education, health, and not only in football, soccer, or games. It's not important. It's good, but not the only thing we need here now in Brazil. We need much more. And to do investment in people, serious people, to work with education in Brazil. Now we show to the world, I imagine, to samba, beautiful girls. It's not good for us.
You think it's not good for the image of Brazil? Let me ask Mauricio this. Do you agree with Marcio there, who says that this World Cup actually at the end showed a not very good image of Brazil, and you know, there were many observations about the lack of black faces in the stadium during matches and so on, that it showed the extent of the social divide that exists in Brazil, and also to some extent the racism that still exists in Brazil today.
Well, my impression is that the World Cup was never meant to solve all social problems in Brazil anyways. And if you think of the whole budget that was spent in the World Cup, a big chunk of it was actually in airports and roads and things that are actually here forever. And my impression is that the one spending that Brazilians disagree with, basically all of them, is the spending on stadia. And the spending on stadia was pretty much about $4 billion. It should have been none, but it was $4 billion. Still, Brazil invests about $50 billion in healthcare every year. So it's difficult to think that it's difficult for me to see that the World Cup was such a hindrance that it stopped Brazil from investing in other sectors. Of course, these other sectors deserve much more investment and much more interest.
But was it a good idea to spend so much money?
Or making a case.
Sorry to interrupt you. Was it a good idea to spend so much money on building stadium, like in Manaus, for instance, a very costly stadium that will likely not be used anymore?
Well, I'd have to say that the legacy issues, I'd take a look afterwards, because some of the stadia are actually in cities which don't have any other infrastructure, sporting infrastructure. Of course, there's very clear criticism about all of them, including São Paulo's, including Brasilia's or Manaus. But my impression is that $4 billion, although it was supposed to be none, doesn't justify the idea that Brazil hasn't invested in other sectors, because it has. I use the public healthcare service, and Brazil invests heavily enough for me to think it's okay, at least in São Paulo. There are grave issues in other cities of the country, but I can't think that $4 billion spent in these other cities would have made such a big difference. I would say that taming corruption and stopping other aspects, including in healthcare, because I'm pretty sure that there's at least $4 billion every year, if possible, that are deviated to other ends, even in investment in healthcare sectors. Okay. There is corruption in every sector, and the World Cup is just one of them.
All right. Well, let's just take a closer look at the numbers. As we've mentioned, there were protests and public sector strikes in Brazil in the weeks leading up to the World Cup. Many saw the huge costs associated with the tournament as a waste of money that could have been spent on things like education and healthcare. Well, the World Cup costs just over $11 billion at a time when Brazil's economy is struggling. The nation's growth forecast forecasts have been cut a number of times, and growth for this year is estimated at less than 1%, while annual inflation has risen to 6.5%. Roberto Forzoni in Manchester, when South Africa hosted the World Cup, there was a benefit. Tourism grew in South Africa. Do you see Brazil benefiting economically from hosting this World Cup?
Absolutely, I do. And I think the reason that whenever a huge sporting event like this occurs, and loads of countries will bid for it. Why do they bid for it? Because it brings in an influx of interest in that country, not just in tourism, but in trading partners as well. The media coverage for Brazil and the World Cup the last month has been phenomenal, you know, through every department, through radio, through TV, through newspaper. So that coverage is going to transfer into some trading partners, some influx in tourism and other benefits that we probably don't see right at the moment, but the benefits will occur long term. That's why these countries bid for the World Cup.
Do you think it will lift Brazil out of the economic slowdown that it's been experiencing?
I think initially there's going to be a depression. The mood of the nation will be really low at the moment. They expected to win the World Cup. They think it's a rite of passage to win the World Cup. They don't count football in Brazil as their national sport. They say volleyball is our national sport. Football is our religion. It's a value. So the nation's obviously going to be really depressed, not just because they went out of the World Cup, but the manner in which they went out of the World Cup.
Right.
So initially, I think there's going to be a depression. Long term, there's going to be benefits to hosting that World Cup.
Marcio, in Rio, I know you don't see Brazil reaping any benefits from hosting this World Cup, but don't you think it could have a positive impact on exposing the problems, the economic problems that your country faced, the experience of the people in the favelas, for instance?
Yes. What will you do with the stadiums in Manaus? We don't need it. We need now hospital. We need schools. We don't need stadiums. We need big stadiums. And where are our athletes? The football soccer are playing in Europe, not in Brazil. We don't have schools in Brazil to soccer, schools of gymnastics, Olympics, or swimming pools to work to other athletes. We only invest in soccer, and I think it's a wrong image, a wrong politicians, wrong state of situation in Brazil. We need more. We need much more investment, and it's insane. When I see in television our president, when she said, "Oh, it's all right, it's okay," it's a lie. She's lying. It's not okay here. The situation is not good in Brazil.
Mauricio Savarese, how do you respond to that? You know, the day-to-day concerns about education, health, everything involved in social well-being are still here. I mean, the World Cup may be over, but these problems still exist today in Brazil and will likely continue to exist for the next few years.
Well, I think Brazil has loads of issues to solve, and that is the case for centuries, actually. But Brazil today has a GDP of more than $1 trillion. It's hard to think that the World Cup would actually make such a big difference for the worst or for the best. To my impression, the World Cup in Brazil, just like in any other country, is basically a marketing event in which you get the people to go behind the nation and foster some infrastructure projects, and then you get a better image for you to get more tourists in the future. It's not going to change dramatically the landscape for Brazil in the social sector. It's not going to change the healthcare or education, but it was not meant for that. That's my impression, and the image of Brazil is surely going to improve, but that doesn't mean that all the issues are going to be solved basically because you have a football tournament.
But do you think maybe the government will be more attentive now that these problems have been exposed to the world and in the lead up to the 2016 Olympics in Brazil?
I think big sporting events, they put a magnifying glass on every aspect of the country. I mean, there were loads of stories about Brazilian waxing, and Brazilian waxing isn't exactly an issue of the country as well. And that's going to happen in the world. Yeah, that's going to happen in the Olympics as well. And they're going to talk about the bikinis, they're going to talk about the social problems, they're going to talk about the police, and that's only fair, because that's why you have sporting events in countries, not only because of the price tag or the investments, it's also for you to understand yourself better as a country and for others to take a look at you and see, well, this is actually a a functioning country, a normal country that deserves to be part of the international community. This is what Brazil has achieved now. It can actually improve in the Olympics. Of course, not forgetting all the issues, but showing that we can be a normal country.
Roberto Forzoni, some have vented their frustrations at President Dilma Rousseff, whose government spent quite a lot on this competition. She's seeking a second term in October. Do you see the outcome of this Football World Cup and Brazil's loss having an impact on her re-election chances?
I think it may well do. During the semi-final, when I think when the fifth goal went in, the supporters started singing against the president, and that could be infectious. You know, that could spread like wildfire, and people start looking for a scapegoat, someone to blame for such a huge, embarrassing and humiliating defeat. And the president may well feel the power of that, on top of the unrest that's there already. So someone needs to pay the price, and it could be the president.
Mauricio, you don't agree, I think. You've been shaking your head there. You don't think that the World Cup will hurt Dilma Rousseff's re-election?
Well, we can see that Brazilians are very, very arrogant about football, even in defeat. And we tend to pin it on the players and the coach. So I was there at the stadium as well when Brazil lost 7-1 to Germany. And I've followed Brazil. I've written a book about Brazilian football culture. And nothing of that actually confirms. My impression is that if President Dilma Rousseff had managed to organize a nice event and Brazil lost, she's still the favorite to win. If it was the contrary, Brazil lost the World Cup just like that. If Brazil won the World Cup and the tournament was poorly managed, she would have much more trouble. But in Brazil, the two things that actually count for re-election, jobs and income. And so far, it has been looking her way. It's difficult to think of the World Cup as a changing factor in that, basically because the opposition candidates also have a horse in this race. The Minas Gerais former governor, Aécio Neves, her main opposition candidate, actually runs the stadium in Minas Gerais. He actually made it build. He actually helped to build it as well. And the other candidate, Eduardo Campos, he did the same in Pernambuco for the Pernambuco Arena. So it's very difficult to think these two things actually match.
All right, let me ask Marcio his view on this. Marcio, would you vote for Dilma Rousseff in October? Would the people that live in the favelas, the people who are affected by, you know, the situation and the cost that was put into the World Cup, will they vote for Dilma Rousseff in October?
Now in favela we have a great problems with the UPP, the Polícia to Pacification. I can't understand the pacification did with guns. It's insane. It's insane. We don't need guns. We need other things. And when we talk with the people in favela, all the people are very sad with this situation. Not only we lost, it's a shame too, but the situation is very, very difficult in favelas now. And now they are hiding the real situation. We have a lot of violence. We have a lot of injustice in favelas now. And Dilma, I don't know, he can be re-elected in Brazil because the people are very, very, very far for the real situation. Okay. The reality in Brazil is the people can vote, but they don't understand what are they doing.
Okay, Roberto, I want to bring you in now to talk about, you know, the whole psychology and, you know, emotions that surround the World Cup. This tournament was Brazil's chance, of course, to rewrite history in that fateful final against Uruguay in 1950. Do you think that the tragedy in the semi-finals and that humiliating 7-1 loss to Germany in this semi-final will haunt them more than their 1950s defeat against Uruguay?
Absolutely. I think it was a historic defeat. It was a defeat no one could have foreseen, and the magnitude of it was just horrendous for the Brazilian people and in particular the players. I think they knew when the second goal went in it was going to be difficult, and I've never seen a team psychologically choke as quickly as the Brazilian team did in that semi-final. So I think it's going to have a long-term impact. It's going to certainly have an impact on the players that play in Brazil. And it wouldn't surprise me if some of those got transfers out of the country or even stopped playing.
But they had a psychologist to prepare them, apparently, for their matches. They had someone helping them deal with their emotions and their feelings. What went wrong? Why didn't it work?
Well, there's a whole host of psychologists specialising in different areas, and I don't know the psychologists that work with the Brazilian team, but what I did read was the focus was on relaxing and making these players feel more relaxed and at ease with themselves. In that cauldron that was the World Cup semi-final, that was in retrospect, that was the wrong strategy. These players should have been subject to pressure situations and how to handle pressure, and also some scenarios that if things do start going wrong, how are we going to handle it? What if scenarios, which a lot of psychologists and a lot of teams wouldn't want to address. They want a psychologist to come in and give them that feel-good factor, that positive factor. So how do I relax in this situation, rather looking at if something goes wrong, how can I handle it? Right. And that's what a good psychological input would have been.
Mauricio, what do you think went wrong? I mean, you can't win a World Cup just on desire. What was missing for this Brazilian team?
Well, my impression is that, of course, they had this so-called six-minute blackout, but there is something deeper in this, which is the lack of talent in Brazilian football. I remember in 2010
Neymar?
when Brazil lost
the lack
to Holland,
of talent?
Pelé was on TV.
What about Neymar and all these big names that play in the European leagues?
Neymar is just one. Nah, they're not that good. I mean, I can tell you just one statistic that actually shows how big the lack of talent is in Brazil. Out of 2012, 2011, 2010, out of the 20 best strikers in Europe, Brazil had one, and that was Hulk. So that shows how Brazil really lacked talent up forward. They have some good defenders, but in the match against Germany, they showed they are not to the level of Thiago Silva, who is probably the only exceptional player you have in the Brazilian defense. And the midfield, Brazilians always had great midfielders in history. They don't have anyone now, and that means that Brazilian football has to go through a major reform in youth teams, in the academy teams, because we've basically fostered players that are very fit, that are very physical, that are very tall, have good endurance, but have not very good talent. In the Brazilian league, teams play Sunday, Wednesday, Sunday, Wednesday. So that makes you that makes you bring players which are basically very physical. And when it comes to the national team, you basically see players that are pretty much to that cut. And Brazil against Germany were not exactly in a blackout only. They were outclassed by Germany because Germany has made an effort for the last 10 years to foster talent and not only to have a teamwork that many people say it's a very big cliche for me to say Germany have only teamwork, but they have very good talent, which Brazil don't, except for Neymar and Thiago Silva.
All right. I think a lot of people might disagree with you on that. But let me just ask Roberto. You know, Roberto, we hear Mauricio. He's passionate about this. Why is it that football has such an impact on the psyche of Brazilian and their self-identity? Why is it so important to them? Why do people say football is a religion in Brazil?
It's just the passion that sport brings, isn't it? I mean, every nation's passionate about the sport, and the Brazilians with their football, it's just ingrained. So there's that long history of success, which has probably been their downfall this year because it become we should win, we will win, and perhaps the preparation was nowhere near as intense. Don't forget the Germans probably, I think, were the only side that built their own training camp, built the place where they stayed, houses, a complex. They wanted to go the whole distance. They knew they were there until the final, and they planned, they designed for success. Something the Brazilians probably missed out on this year because they thought they were going to do it naturally.
Marcio, in Rio. Marcio, do you think Brazil and Brazilians will get over this defeat? Have people forgotten about this defeat already and are moving on with their lives?
We can't live in the past. We have to go on. We have to step forward. We have to prepare. We have to study. We saw the German team was very, very focused. They are studying. They are commitment with the shirt. They use the Flamengo t-shirt. They are very, very sympathetic with the people. And we don't need stars. We need soccer men. We need the Brazilian soccer men who play football, only to play soccer, to do his job. They have to do his job, only it. And be the best, not necessarily now. Be the best is, I have to be the best in my profession, only it. The doctors have to be the best in their profession. Everybody have to do the best in the profession.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for an interesting discussion. Mauricio Savarese in Rio, Roberto Forzoni in Manchester, and Marcio Januario also in Rio. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. And do please let us know your thoughts. You can leave your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or go to @AJ Inside Story on Twitter. I'm Folly Bah Thibault. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.